All right, good morning, everybody. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about seed germination and some of the strategies we use and some tips on how to do it cheap, some DIY ideas, and some of the differences between different seeds. So first, I would like to say I think people should be aware that different seeds have different seed germination requirements. So that's very important when sowing seeds. It's not all seeds are not the same, and some require different things to trigger an efficient and quick germination. So some of those factors are some require light for germination, some require darkness for germination, some require cold stratification, some require fire. Of course, those get more into perennials. Some require acidification, where you actually they get digested by birds to break down the seed coat for germination. So today I'm going to specifically kind of talk about the annual flowering and vegetable crops, because that's what we're doing. So that's primarily going to be, they require light, or maybe they require darkness or specific temperatures. So one of the crops we're growing this year is celery, and celery is a very small seed. If you've ever grown it, it's kind of a tricky one. They say it's about 14 to 21 days for the seeds to germinate. And sometimes it takes even longer than that. They're very small, they require light, and to get the best germination, it actually does better if you have cooler nighttime temperatures than daytime temperatures. And so what we do to get that is we actually start them just in a dish of water, and I put that dish under the grow lights for about 5 days. And what will happen is during the on time, because I have my lights running normally about 14 to 16 hours a day on, and then the rest of the day off. So during the light time, it'll get up to about 75 degrees under the light, and when the lights go off, because it's in my basement, it'll get down to about 65. So that swing helps speed up the germination. And once I see the radicle piercing the seed coat, which is kind of the root shoot, I pick them out with the tip of a pencil and place them in my grow trays. And while that might sound like a lot of work, context is everything. First of all, I'm looking at home scale or homestead scale gardening. I'm not looking at commercial farming, obviously. And no matter how you do it, a lot of people end up transplanting them when they're young, and they'll just sow them into a flat, and that's also time consuming. And I think that disturbance later on with the transplant is actually more detrimental to the vigor of the plant or the seedling than just doing it when it's in a seed and that radicle is just pierced. So that's one strategy I do. Another one, these are straw flowers I have here, and they require a minimum of 12 hours a day of light to germinate. And again, they're a very small seed, kind of like celery. And so they're a tricky one. So what we do is we, on this, for the sake of space, I just use little soil blockers. So I've got 120 starts on this little tiny spinach container. And I seed them on the top. I spritz them with a spray bottle so I don't displace the seeds. And then I use the other half of the spinach container to form a humidity dome. And 3, 4, 5 days, and these things start germinating. And then one thing with doing them in very small container or soil blocks like this is you do have to transplant them, but you save a lot of room during the germination phase, and you don't have flats with voids in them, because one of the problems with the big 72 cell or 128 cell trays is if you don't get great germination, then you've got all these voids in your tray, and it's kind of a waste of space. So these ones, I seeded 120, and so far I think I've got about 50 or 60 that have germinated pretty good. So if I only have one little flat of them, that's more than what we need for our little garden. So another neat strategy. And obviously, a lot of people buy spinach or salad greens in these containers, so they're cheap and easy to find. And if you're not doing them outdoors in UV light, they'll last a few seasons for sure. And then another strategy we use for a lot of our seeds that do not require light. So the two I just mentioned do require light, but if they don't require light, we do the germination chamber. So we have an old fridge that we gutted, and I put a thermostat and humidistat on it with a humidity source and a heat source. And so what that does is it allows me to target the exact temperature that these plants need for germination. So for example, tomatoes, we shoot for about 85-degree germination temp, whereas some of the brassicas will maybe be upper 70s, and some of the other things may be low 70s. Something like a lettuce, while a lot of people think they need light to germinate, in my experience they don't. In fact, I buy pelleted seed, and so it literally is cut off from light, and those won't germinate above about 72 degrees. So some things actually need cooler temps. You know, spinach, while we don't really transplant it, it also needs cooler temps to germinate efficiently. So so in the germ chamber, the biggest thing is, as soon as that seedling emerges and starts pushing through, you need to pull it out of the chamber so that it can get under light. And so here's an example of a flat of some different brassicas that we just seeded, and you can see they haven't even really gotten their chlorophyll yet because they've been in that chamber, and a lot of them haven't even fully emerged, but because they started emerging, I pulled them. And so this is a mixed tray. They're all brassicas, but because it's different seed from different seed packets, and you know, it's a couple rows of lacinato kale, some broccoli, and some cauliflower, they're germinating at slightly different rates or speeds. And so that's one factor to think about. And if you're doing this on a small scale, I would recommend doing a lot of your stuff in like little six cell small trays so that you can do like seeds in each container. One example of a bad way to do it is if you're trying to germinate celery next to, say, cucumbers or something like that, plants with completely different germination requirements, at different days to germination, and different amounts of time that they'll spend in those cells. You know, most of the curcubits, like cucumbers, squash, watermelon, they need to be out and in the ground, out of those trays within about a week to 10 days because they don't like root disturbance. Whereas a celery, in a lot of cases, can be in there for 6 weeks or more, maybe 8 weeks, because they're kind of slow to get started. So sowing light stuff in smaller trays is a great option. You know, if you're doing bigger batches, then the 72 cell flats are great if it's like plants, but I would not sow completely different seeds in these big flats, because you're going to have really you're going to have voids at one point, or you're going to be waiting for these things to germinate when these things are ready to be transplanted, and it's kind of a pain. So yeah, and then so I guess to show you what we've got going here, we've got some tomato starts going, a few different varieties. This was a mistake. These are rootstock Estimino tomatoes, and I didn't get them out of the germination chamber as quick as I should have, because they germinated at about 48 hours. And so I've got some really leggy stuff. So we'll see how that works out. They're not essential. And another option I have is I can cut tops off once they get a little bigger and put them in a rooting chamber to then get new roots, and I can propagate them that way so that I can still use them for grafting. This is my celery. So the celery I did in the way I explained, but once I do place it in the 72 cell flat, I put plastic over it, and I don't know if you can see those, but there's a few that are starting to get some green on them. There's one that's starting to get some green on it. So they're tiny, they're really slow, but that strategy does make it a lot easier. Here's onions and shallots, and the way I do onions and shallots, one, I do them from seed because they're biennials, and so if you buy the onion sets, they're kind of already set up to flower that year that you're growing them, and you don't want onions to flower if you're trying to harvest the bulb, which most people, that's why they grow them. So by doing them by seed, you're much less likely, it still happens, but you're much less likely to have flower flowers form that year. And then the other thing with onions is they do very well with bare root transplant. So by sowing them in a tray, I have 250 of each of those, a yellow storage, a red storage, and a shallot. And they can all kind of intertwine their root systems, and I'm not worried about them being confined in a 72 cell flat or any form of a celled flat. And then when I transplant them, I just pull out a whole bunch of them and shake the soil off, and I plant them literally bare root. Another great one for bare root transplant is asparagus. Asparagus is super hardy, super easy to grow, and by doing them in a big flat, they aren't restricted, because what happens if you grow some of these in these individual celled flats, you end up getting a lot of girdling, and it does stifle the overall growth of the plant. And then we've got some brassicas. Those are some purple cauliflowers and some broccolis, and then some cabbages. So, and a lot of these are getting close to needing to go out. I think these brassicas are about 2.5 or 3 weeks in here. Again, with the germination chamber and the grow lights, you can really get fast growth, which is nice, because it limits the amount of time you need them under lights or you need to spend on them. And to me, if I can get a plant ready to go out into the garden in 2 weeks instead of 4 weeks by using some of these strategies, then it's totally worth the time, because maintaining seedlings for an extra 2 weeks is tedious, it's time consuming. You got to make sure you keep them wet but not soaked. Just endless challenges with that. So yeah, I guess that's about it. And I am running out of space in here pretty quick. My plan with a lot of these is to grow them in grow bags so I can put them in the greenhouse while the weather's still cold. We had kind of a surprise late winter cold snap where we got down to 9 degrees last night. So some of these things that were supposed to go out this week are not going to go out till next week. So we're getting a little cramped in here, but I think I'm going to be fine. And then another thing to think about is having enough grow light space and the proper grow light placement. So I did a little rolling table, and my seedlings, I end up putting about, I want the lights about 3 inches above the plant canopy. And the reason for that is you really want close nodal spacing, you want thick stems, and you want stout, stocky plants. You don't want leggy plants because they'll be weak. So I'm using T5 fluorescent grow lights. If you're using high pressure sodiums or metal halides or bigger lamps, then you're not going to want to put them that close, obviously, because you'll roast them. But with these, they don't generate much heat, and you really do want them close, within a few inches. You do not want your lights 2 feet above your plant canopy. And the last thing I want to talk about is fans. You have to have circulation with growing indoors. If you don't, disease pressures will go up, and the plants will not grow as fast, and you will not get the girth development. And that's huge. You really need the stem to develop girth. And the way they do that is with moving around with fans. You could technically come through and just kind of brush all the canopies with your hand, but it's more efficient to just put a fan in there, and it'll help them develop that strength and structure. And then from this point to going outside, it's important to realize you have to slowly acclimate them to full spectrum light. So most grow lights are going to be either in a blue or red light spectrum, and not a full spectrum. And the sun, of course, is full light spectrum. So when you put these outside and they're first exposed to UV light, they will wither and die if you put them out into 8 hours of direct sunlight immediately. So you really need to slowly acclimate them to that environment. And same thing with cold. If you're putting them out into a cold environment from a 65 or 70 degree basement, they need to acclimate slowly. So frost blankets are a great way to deal with some of that. And a lot of frost blankets provide some amount of shade. So otherwise, slide them under a bench or put them in indirect light, or maybe just a couple hours of direct light for the first few days to, again, get them acclimated. Otherwise, you do all this work and it's kind of in vain, because they'll die. So anyway, that's some of the strategies that we use. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks a lot.